Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen, an ELC pastor in Southwest Iowa. I prepare these videos weekly on a twofold basis. First of all, to help move my brain out of percolation mode, as I call it, as I think and ponder and wonder about the text throughout the course of the week, and move into what I call sermonation mode when I am actually preparing the sermon that I will preach to my congregation on this coming Sunday. The second reason for these videos is just to allow you, the viewer who have stumbled across this digital doorstep for whatever reason has brought you here, to gain different insights into the different gospel texts as arranged for worship purposes. Now, this coming Sunday, which is July 5th, 2015, Independence Day weekend, the day after the day, you know what I mean, 4th of July weekend. The gospel text is Mark chapter 6, verses 1 through 13, and if for reference, this is the 6th Sunday after Pentecost, if you are curious about that. This story happens to be another two-part story, similar to last week. What's different from last week is that second story was a story within a story, or an interruption in the midst. This particular passage seems to encompass two different stories just back to back. So they are definitely connected to one another, but they do not interrupt one another, as we saw a week ago. So we see that Jesus left that place, which is the place where he had healed the daughter of Jairus, somewhere in a town alongside the Sea of Galilee, which was part of last week's story. So he left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. So we see that Jesus goes home. He's been out road tripping around, which is kind of what he does, but he decides he's going to swing through the hometown, and he brings his disciples with him. So they witness everything that's about to happen. On the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, as was his custom, and many who heard him were astounded. Astounded is kind of a little bit of an oddball word there. Astounded kind of typically sounds more positive. This was more of a negative connotation. So they were flabbergasted, would maybe be a better way to say it, or they're almost scandalized by what Jesus has to say. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands?" What this is talking about, we don't see it here in Mark, but we see it in some of the other Gospels, that Jesus is reading from the prophet Isaiah. Once he reads from the scroll, then he begins to interpret it, basically preach on it, is kind of what he was doing. That's kind of the custom within the synagogue for the traveling or the visiting rabbi to speak on the text that they have read. So he reads it and then interprets it as being about himself. I apologize, I'm blanking on exactly what the passage from Isaiah is, but it's a prophecy that's about himself, and he shares that within the synagogue. Well, the people in the synagogue freak out. They don't know what to make of it. And so that's where this is coming from. Where did this man get all this? Where does he get this teaching? Who is this guy? Then they go on and they say, "Is not this the carpenter?" Which might have kind of been a shot at the work that he did, but not necessarily, because carpenters were fairly well regarded. So that's in itself is not an insult, other than to say, like, this is a carpenter. Why is he claiming these things about, or where does he know this stuff from? Then they go on to say, "Is this not the son? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. So now they're potentially taking a shot at Jesus' birth by naming him as the son of Mary and not the son of Joseph. Some scholars think this is just an indication that Joseph is dead by this point. Others are thinking that the people in his hometown know the scandal of Mary already being pregnant, and so they're taking a shot at his illegitimate status by naming him the son of the woman instead of instead of the man in a patriarchal society. That's kind of a big deal. But essentially what they're saying, it's kind of going back to that, like, where's he getting this from? This guy's the carpenter. We know this guy. We know his mom. We know his brothers. His sisters have grown up. They're here among us. Their families are here among us. It's like in the small town where, everybody's related to everybody. That's kind of what they're saying. Like, he's one of us. We know who he is. This guy's not God. Why is he doing this stuff? And that's where they took offense at him. Again, that's like they were scandalized by him. They tripped over him. They couldn't get past it. It's like the notion of, who are you to be saying these things? I can't, because of who you are, I can't accept it. I can't get over it. In response to that, Jesus says to them, prophets are not without honor, except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house. And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. Okay, so this whole thing is going on. Now, again, the other Gospels give us a little bit more information. Luke in particular, Matthew not so much. But Luke gives us more insight. We see more detail, and we see that actually the people take him out to throw him off a cliff. So they're really like scandalized by what they're saying. They think this is blasphemy. They're going to take him out and kill him because that's what the law says that they are supposed to do when someone blasphemes like this. So Mark doesn't necessarily give us that type of thing, but we definitely see there's opposition. And Jesus kind of spouts off at him. He's like, well, okay, this should be expected because prophets are usually well regarded, but not in their hometown. And again, it's kind of that hometown boy of, we've known you since you were young. Who are you to tell us what to do? Kind of a connotation or situation. So we see, though, that Jesus is there and he is preaching the gospel as he knows it from God because he is God. And people are scandalized by it. People are offended by it. People can't handle it. They can't take it. And so this is a good reminder for us that in our lives, in our reality, as we live our lives following Jesus, as we proclaim the gospel, that there is opposition to it. There are those who say, I can't take this. I can't accept it. And that is a good lesson for the disciples who, if you recall, are here with Jesus witnessing all of this because of what's about to come up for them. Then he went out among the villages teaching. So now he's continuing his road tripping. He called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He ordered them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics. He said to them, whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place. If any place will not welcome you and they refuse to hear you, as you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them. So they went out and proclaimed that all should repent. They cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. Okay, so now Jesus is putting the disciples to work. They've been following along for however long, and we're about a third of the way through, actually maybe a little bit more than that, not quite halfway, but pretty close to halfway through Mark's gospel at this point. And so the disciples have been following along. They've been witnessing the teachings. They've been witnessing the miracles. They've seen all kinds of stuff. And now they've seen that there is opposition to the gospel. And why does Jesus do this and let them see this? Well, because now they're getting put to work. Just as we believe that when an individual is baptized and comes into the community of Christ, the family of God, their fellow worker, their ministry begins right away. Doesn't matter how old they are, their ministry begins. And Jesus is doing that with the disciples. He's sending them out 2 by 2 as a good reminder that, hey, we don't do ministry by ourselves. We are never alone in it. And that's a nice reminder that, hey, the Holy Spirit, in the very least, is with us all the time. But and also, interestingly enough, it talks about Jesus is going among the villages teaching. And during this time, he's sending the disciples out 2 by 2. So it could be that during this period of time, we don't know exactly how long it is, although it carries over into the next chapter, that perhaps they're interacting, perhaps the different groups are occasionally bumping into each other, because it's not a real big area that they are active in during this time. They're around the region of Galilee, which is not huge, probably the size of a couple of counties here in Iowa, just not really overly big. So they're probably bumping into each other, probably bumping into Jesus at different times. They're just kind of itinerant, moving around to different places. Jesus tells them, when you enter into a village and someone welcomes you into their house, stay there. Don't stay there one night and then try and find a better house down the street and go down there. Accept those who have accepted you. This is an interesting portion because it talks about the spread of the gospel needing to be dependent on the hospitality of others. That we need to be received. It's not just about them receiving the gospel, but that when we are proclaiming, um, part of that is that we are received by others and that we depend on the hospitality. So often we think of people need to come into our churches. They need to come to us to get this. Well, no, this is a reminder that we're called to go out into the world and be received so that we can share the gospel. So that's an interesting connotation of what's kind of going on there. Now, the last little point is the whole shake the dust off your feet or off your sandals. That's an old Jewish custom. It actually refers back to when they did not want to be associated with Gentiles. If they had been in a Gentile town, someone who rejects God, rejects Yahweh, they would shake the dust off their feet or wipe the dust off their feet because they don't want to be associated with that town at all. Like, we're even leaving the dust of you behind. We want to completely separate ourselves. And what Jesus is saying here is, if someone does not accept the gospel, they don't accept you, they throw you out, well, wipe the dust off. Be separate from them and move on to the next town where you are accepted. This could be a difficult passage in this day and age as we want to speak to against judgment, and we look for inclusion. We desire for the gospel to be inclusive. And all encompassing. So this is kind of a tricky little thing to ponder on of why would Jesus tell the disciples to separate themselves? Could be just because Jesus recognizes that there are those who will reject the gospel. And so we move on from that to the next person and to the next person and the next person. It would be glorious if everyone who heard it came to it instantly. But as we know, that doesn't happen. That can be difficult for us when we share our faith, but yet that's the reality that we face. That's kind of what's going on in this passage today. If you have any other thoughts or questions or comments, you want to continue the conversation, drop those down in the comment section. Love to hear from you when those comments show up. By all means, let's continue it that way. Otherwise, I hope you have a blessed week, and we'll catch you next time.